Yeah, I'd like to welcome everyone to the uh, Fishes of the Little Miami Drainage. My name is Chris Yoder. I'm the Research Director at Midwest Biodiversity Institute. As most of you know, the Little Miami Conservancy contracted with us to provide this session tonight and tomorrow night. So we've prepared some slides to help with aiding concepts of fish identification. Matt, why don't you hit the next slide? I also want to introduce Matt Sarver, who's a aquatic biologist with MBI. He primarily does fish surveys as part of our work, both here in Ohio and throughout the Midwest and the Northeast. And then we also have Ed Rankin, who's a veteran senior scientist with MBI, formerly of Ohio EPA. And he's going to provide some additional things about fish distribution in the Little Miami. So a couple words about MBI, a couple screenshots from our website about who we are. Notice we do have a section on citizen science and volunteer training. So that fits well within what we're doing here. Next slide, Matt. And this is our citizen science and volunteer training page. We do offer training classes ranging from an intermediate macroinvertebrate identification to introduction to wetlands to the citizens qualitative habitat evaluation index. This particular training gave us an opportunity to develop an introductory course for fish identification, which we will probably add to the website. So we certainly appreciate LMC's asking us to do this. Has kind of spurred us to add that to our course offerings. Next slide. So we've arranged the training into two sessions. Session one is today. And we're going to talk about the basics of fish anatomy, fish tolerances to environmental disturbance. We'll mention the recently released Naturalist Guide to the Fishes of Ohio. Then we'll be showing slides of common fish species in Little Miami River tributaries. We were asked to concentrate on the smaller streams initially because that's where some of the field work and that would come later would be conducted. So that'll take us through slide 58 of 106. And then we'll have just a brief overview of fish distribution in a kind of a package tool we have called based on Power BI, which is a Microsoft product, but it's an example of how you can use Power BI to display and manipulate data. And then, of course, we'll take questions. So that's tonight. Tomorrow night, if you want to flip to the next slide, we'll finish up with fishes of the Little Miami main stem and also the more uncommon and rare fishes of the drainage. And then, of course, follow-up questions, which may emanate from tonight and certainly tomorrow night. So that's what we have in store from you. And I'll turn it over to Matt Sarver.
All right,
Eric,
good evening.
You can mute me.
Good evening, everyone. So we'll start with just some of the basics that we use as part of identifying a species. So some of the things we look at are the different fins. So the dorsal fin can have two distinct separate spiny dorsal and a soft dorsal. Spiny dorsal has obviously the spines, and then the soft dorsal doesn't. You can brush it and touch it and you won't get stuck. The caudal fin is the tail. You have your anal fin, pelvic fins, and pectoral fins. Those are useful. Well, pectoral fins are useful for sunfish species. The caudal peduncle is the portion of the fish's body that leads into the tail that helps with some minnow species. And the opercle is the covering for the gills, which can be helpful for a number of different species. So in some of the characteristics that I'll use to describe the fish for today, I'll be using these terms throughout. And the lateral line is a series of organelles down the side of the fish. They kind of look like perforations in the scales. For some fish, it's pretty important for ID. The number of scales or whether the lateral line is complete or incomplete. So talk about some of that with these species. So tolerance groupings for species that we'll be talking about: intolerant, moderately intolerant, intermediate, and then you have the moderate. Oh, well, let's be moderately tolerant and tolerant. The intolerant and moderately intolerant combined are the sensitive species, generally indicative of good water quality, good habitat. They generally have declined with more human intervention in the streams, so we generally like to see them. And then the tolerant, those species generally increase with human intervention. And the intermediate, they don't have a designation. So a lot of these fish won't have a designation, and they're just the intermediates. So this is generally, I think, the new fish book that people use for Ohio. It's got great pictures. Brian Zimmer did a really good job with his photographs. Good locality maps. They break it up into, I think, 2 different eras, which is really nice. So you can see that, you know, if a fish isn't necessarily there anymore, you can see if it was. They have a really good description for field ID. And then some of these fish species are pretty similar. So they give a good comparison if you got 2 really close species, like we'll go through rainbow darter and orange throat. You can get spawning information, and they even provide the breeding guild, which is interesting to me. It's really nice to see a lot of like the broadcast spawners who need clean substrate, and they describe some of that. They also have a key features diagram, which is something I kind of showed you earlier with just the fish anatomy. They have the same kind of thing. They may go into a little more depth, including the different types of scales. They have key to family, so that'll get you to like sunfish versus darters versus suckers, but they really don't have a key at all in order to get you down to species using the book. So you're really relying on pictures, which is okay if you're just going out and kicking around. But for me, I still use Trotman if I have to go down. He has a really good key down to species, and I use that in the lab. All right, so common fish. Common carp. It's pretty ubiquitous in a lot of streams. We have this graph here that shows the likelihood of capture versus the quality of habitat. So here, this fish generally likes low gradient streams that are really warm, a lot of organic material, generally scores low on the QHEI. So as you can see, as the QHEI goes up, generally we see less of this species. And obviously this species was introduced because people used it as a food source, and it could survive in very polluted waters, and still does. So it has been deemed by Ohio EPA as a tolerant species. I forgot to mention that we'll also talk a little bit about collection methods. Like if you guys want to go out and try to capture these fish, So for this one, we use electrofishing for our collection purposes, but there are plenty of people who go and actually target these guys hook and line, and you probably can go out and seine for them if you get into a shallow pool or something. They could be there. All right, so central stone rollers, they generally are in riffles with decent gravel and sand substrates. I'm pretty sure they generally feed on algae, so that's generally what they like. You can identify them they have actually small scales for a minnow. They also have this U-shaped mouth with kind of fleshy lips to scrape the rocks, and they're this kind of bronzy brass color. So when you grab a fish, if you see a fish that is kind of bronzy, brassy, and you flip it over and look at its mouth and it's got kind of a U shape, you're probably looking at a stone roller. We collect these. You can collect them at all sizes of streams with these type of riffles with gravel and sand, and you can collect them with the seine. We use electrofishing, and if you're really good at it, I guess microfishing is also a thing that you can collect them. A lot of people do that. Just basically hook and line, but you're targeting minnows, darters, the small stuff. And this is the most common fish that we have in our database for the Little Miami tributaries. The black-nosed dace kind of looks similar to a stone roller. It has a pointed snout, but this will have a really dark lateral band that's black, and it has even smaller scales. These guys inhabit really small streams, headwater streams that have a decent gradient to them, so they've got decent flow, and they have sand and gravel bottoms. They also generally like permanent flow. And these guys are also tolerant of human influences too. You can collect these with a seine because they inhabit really small streams, so pretty easy to collect. And we also use a backpack electrofisher a lot for them. Another dace, this southern red-bellied dace. This species also is a habit, likes headwater, small streams. They like undercut banks for cover, and if they don't have undercut banks, they like deep pools to where they can actually school together for protection. They need really good habitat. You can identify them they have actually two black lateral bands that run down their side. It's kind of faint in this one, but what you also actually see if you collect them at the right time of year, the males will get these really bright yellow fins, which is pretty cool. Again, they're easy to collect because they're in small streams and where they are, and if they don't have undercut banks, they just school together. Backpack e-fisher or a seine will work. Suckermouth minnow. These guys are generally prairie stream fish. They like turbid waters with high gradient, a lot of flow. We'll find them in riffles with large substrates, large gravel, cobble. These guys also have that downturned mouth that kind of has fleshy lips. They kind of look like a sucker mouth, or like a sucker. They will have this dark lateral stripe down the side as well. They'll have a kind of a bluish hue to them. They won't be that brassy color of central stone rollers. They also have a dark caudal spot right there at their tail, which is a good identifying characteristic as well. Generally, boat and wading fishing gear, electrofishing gear for them, but because they like riffles, the shallow parts of these moderate streams, you probably can get them with the seine if you find the right spot. Creek chubs, These guys are really tolerant of anthropogenic disturbances, so silt and things like that, but they do like large substrates, coarse material like large gravel, cobble. These guys, they have a dark lateral line, band down their lateral line. They also have really small scales towards the top of their head, back to their dorsal fin. And this picture really doesn't show it very well. They actually have a black dot at the dorsal insertion, right where the dorsal fin goes into the body at the front end. There's a black spot there. Because you can get these guys in any size stream with good flow, no flow, limited flow. You can use any form of electrofishing or seining, and again, microfishing, I'm sure, would be a thing that you could collect them. Blunt-nosed minnow, these guys are really tolerant. They also have the genus Pomethyles, which they're a part of. They have really small predorsal scales. It has a really blunt snout. They also have a dark lateral line. And then they all, just like the creek chub, they do have a black caudal spot at the front. I mean, not caudal spot, black spot on their dorsal fin, excuse me. They're in all size streams. They don't do very well with competition. So if it's a really nice stream, you won't find very many. But like I said, since they're in a lot of different size streams, you get into a smaller stream, you can collect them with the seine if you're out there with one, or any of the electrofishing gear. Fathead minnows are really similar, same genus. They also have the small predorsal scales. They can have that dark lateral stripe. Generally, it's much less pronounced than a blunt-nosed minnow. They like muddy bottoms and small streams, and they're even less decent competitors than blunt-nosed minnow. So if they have a lot of other species around, they won't do very well. So generally you see a lot of these guys in really degraded systems. Another method you can use to compare or to differentiate them from blunt nose is they have that incomplete lateral line. And because they like these smaller streams, a backpack electrofisher and a seine for collection. This is probably the most colorful fish in Ohio. Variegated darter might give it a run for its money, but these guys are really pretty. These pictures don't do them justice, but rainbow darters are really pretty, especially during breeding season, generally in April. These guys like moderate and small streams, sand, gravel, cobble, boulder, really nice substrates, generally limited silt. You can collect them with all methods of electrofishing in the seine. They generally like riffles, but you can find them in runs and in the margins of riffles too. They don't like as much flow as some of the other species, so they'll avoid really high flow. These guys are really similar to orange throats. Some of the differences are the fact that the males will have orange in their anal fin. Orange throats will only have blue, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Also, one of the differences is kind of subtle, but it's really interesting. They'll have 6 vertical bands that run from the anal fin back to the caudal peduncle. Orange throats will only have 5. And you can see with the graph how much more likely you are to find them in really nice systems. This is, with an R² of 1, this is pretty impressive. So the nicer the system, the more likely you're going to find these guys. And the orange throat here, as you can only see blue in the anal fin, and you can see that they only have 5 bars. These guys really prefer headwaters. They don't go as large rivers as excuse me, as rainbow darters, and they generally like lower gradient. They're less common because they like the smaller streams. We do find them in the same stream though. I have been in plenty of places where both of them are present. So in the QHEI versus likelihood of collection is interesting for this one too. Because they like smaller streams, generally smaller streams don't do quite as well in the QHEI as larger ones, so that could be a reason why the line is a little more flat for this one. But because these guys are in smaller streams, a backpack electrofisher will work quite well, and you can even seine for them because they like the shallower parts of small streams. And here we have the comparison of the two. These are males in color for breeding season. And you can see the male rainbow on top will get that orange and blue in the anal fin, while the male for the orange throat just has that blue. Thanks, Zach Alley, for doing this. He's actually from the Cincinnati area. So he was really excited to let us use the photos for these. Green side darters, they're green. The identification for these guys, they get really large, 6 inches or so. That's pretty big for a darter, especially in ethiostoma. They will have these W's that run along laterally down their sides all the way back to the caudal fin. That's really the best identifier. The bottom picture is a picture of a male in breeding color. So the U's and W's are kind of muted because they get the green bands, but they have those really large pectoral fins and they have that really blunt nose. Really the only thing similar to this is a banded darter, which gets nowhere near as large. These guys inhabit riffles of moderates and high gradient streams with larger substrates. They prefer, they generally like moderate sized streams. They don't really do large streams in big numbers or headwaters. They're moderately intolerant to pollution, and you can collect them with the seine because they're a darter and they inhabit riffles. It's pretty easy to do that when you find them. Fantail darters, they have really stubby, spiny dorsal fin. It's really shallow. It's kind of nubby, especially on the males. And these guys inhabit really small streams as well. They like gravel, boulder, larger substrates. They're really common when you find them. So a backpack electrofisher, seine, easy to collect them. They also have that fan pattern on their tail, which is a pretty good characteristic as well. You'll find two varieties. You'll have the barred fantail as well, and the striped one, the striped fantail. These are barred. The striped will have lateral stripes, including the bars. Same species, just a different look to them. Johnny darters, these guys are pretty bland. The bottom is a male in color, which is pretty cool. They get really dark, but generally you find them, they're kind of boring. They have these X's and Y pattern along the side towards the bottom. They generally like smaller streams. They prefer sand. They like smaller substrates. They're pretty common. And you can easily collect them with a backpack electrofisher or seine. And here's the banded darter. So this is a male in color. You can see the green bands. Those are pretty. Those stay when they're not in color too. They're pretty similar to the green side. without the U's and W's, and they are much smaller, only a couple inches long as adults. They like riffles, gravel, cobble, larger substrates. You can find them in any size stream. That's really nice. They're intolerant of silt, pollutants. They really need good habitat, as you can see from the graph down at the bottom. And because again they're a darter, they like riffles, shallow areas, a seine, or any method of electrofishing. You'll be able to get them. So here's a log perch. This is a different genus. This is genus Persina. These guys are a little more up in the water column. They'll mostly reside on the bottom, but they'll move up and down. They like riffles and gravel bars in larger streams. So with clean sand and gravel, they're really common generally where they're found. They have this tiger striping along their side and really pointed snouts, which make them pretty easy to ID once you get one. And you can collect them with a seine. They're a little more difficult because they like the larger streams. If you get it, you can probably get them in pools or at the base of runs, generally. Mottled sculpin. There's only a few species of sculpin in Ohio, and this one is a headwater species. This likes cold water with a lot of movement of the water. Likes high oxygen, gravel and cobble substrates. These guys, they're modeled these different shades of brown, and they have this really wide head that kind of looks like a spoon turned upside down. And they're pretty common where they are, and they're easy to collect with a backpack electrofisher or a seine. And they're pretty cool. I think they're really cool to look at too. But again, small streams, generally cold water. Here is a complex of, we're going to go through 3 species that look extremely similar. So the difference in them are kind of subtle. They like different habitats, at least the next 2 do from the emerald shiner. These guys generally are in pools of larger rivers. And they generally don't go into riffles or runs. They're extremely common. So when you collection, generally electrofishing, boat, wading gear, not really backpack. Seining would be hard. The pools would be too deep. And trawls, if you're in an area where you can get a boat in and stuff like that. The big differences here for these species are its snout length. The emerald shiner generally has a short one. The anal fin is pointed, and actually when it's closed like that, you can see it kind of looks like a hook. And then with these guys, the dorsal fin is set behind the pelvic fin, as you can see with those vertical bars. These guys, for these next 3, they all kind of look like arrows. They have the forked tail, and they have really slender, long bodies. So the next one is the rosy face, which this one is a male in color, versus what they normally look like. They normally very silvery, very similar to the emerald shiners. These guys also have long snout, longer than the other 2. Their pelvic fins are set in front of their dorsal fin. And with this species, the difference is it's the most between the 3. So the dorsal fin is set back the furthest. And then the anal fin is rounded, versus the other 2 are pointed. So if you get into a stream and you catch a fish that looks like these, the first thing I would look at is snout length and the rounded anal fin. The next species, the silver shiner, will have crescents around its nostrils, and it looks most similar to this rosy face. So rosy face won't have those crescents if you get into a place that has both, which is possible, because these guys inhabit similar spaces in the water as the silver shiner. They like runs with high gradients, gravel, sand, boulder, cobble. They don't like silt. They're pretty common where they are. They like to school together. So they're intolerant of any human intervention, any silt, pollutants. They don't like it. So not really a backpack. It says all methods, not really a backpack, but if you can get at a base of a run in a moderate stream, you might be able to get them with a seine. And like the graph shows, the better the habitat, the more likely you're to find them. Here's the silver shiner. It looks a lot more similar to the emerald shiner in it's really silvery. It has a shorter snout. It's longer than the emeralds, but it's shorter than the rosy face. It will have the adults, juveniles will have dark crescents around the nares, so you'll be able to pick it up, look at it from the top down, and if it looks like there's crescents around it, you got a silver shiner. That's the first thing I look at for this fish. These guys generally get larger than the other two. Emeralds can get really big, but if you're in a stream where you got good flow, it's a larger arrow-shaped fish, you probably got a silver shiner. And again, the dorsal fin is set behind the pelvic fins, and it has a pointed anal fin just like the emerald shiner. These guys really like flow. The base of really fast runs and riffles, larger streams preferred. They like the bigger substrates, cobble, boulder, larger gravel. They're pretty common. Again, they school together. They're also intolerant, like the rosy face, and really boat and wading gear, because of the flow that they generally like. Nets and seining probably won't work. And here are the three kind of set on top of one another. You can see that the nose of the emerald shiner is the shortest. The rosy face has the longest. You can see how pointed the anal fins are versus the rosy face, which is rounded. So pretty decent comparison of the three. Sand shiner. So with a lot of shiners in Ohio, I start with this one if we collect a bunch, because it looks like so many. You'll get 7 anal rays, and that will separate it from a number of species like the mimic shiner, the channel shiner, right off the bat, who look almost identical. The scale shape also is an identifier. These guys don't have tall scales versus their width. The mimic shiner and the ghost shiner and the channel shiner will have really tall scales versus how wide they are. So if you find a minnow that's kind of short and stocky, start with the sand shiner and then work from there. These guys like runs and pools, moderate sized stream, general sand and gravel. They're fairly common. They're across Ohio, and once the streams get larger, mimic and then channel shiners will generally take their place. You can find both mimic and sand shiners, or channel and sand shiners at the same site. They're moderately intolerant, but because these guys like smaller streams, a seine, you can get them with any form of electrofishing too. Here's our mimic shiner. General differences, so this one will have the 8 anal rays. It has tall scales versus the width. Sorry about the picture. This is the best I could do, unfortunately. These guys, excuse me, they like larger streams, moderate to large, with generally moderate gradients, sandy silt, silty gravel. Not so much that the silt fills in the spaces, but they like a bit of silt on the surface of the substrates. It's pretty common. It's intolerant to pollutants, and you can get this pretty easy with a boat or electrofishing gear, wading electrofishing gear. Sanding is possible in some of the moderate to smaller streams. So silverjaw minnow. This guy, they have this pointed face, but the big identifying characteristic with them is they'll have these interesting cavernous spaces in the jaw, and they kind of look like pearl when you look at them. So that's the identifying characteristics that I look for immediately. Is it does have a long face and it looks like it has a big jaw, and does that jaw have that kind of pearl tinge to it? These guys are generally in smaller streams. Clean sand is their favorite. They're pretty common when they're found. Backpack electrofisher or seine, it's pretty easy to get them. So spot fins. So these guys are pretty colorful when they're in breeding color. They'll get these tubercles on their heads. You can see in this photo, they're kind of small. They're the little bumps. And they'll have this black spot on the back side of their dorsal fin. The only other fish that has this in Ohio is the steel color shiner, and we'll talk about that one next. They look extremely similar. You can get them at both sites, but when you're looking at this versus a steel color, what you look at is when you have a male in color, the steel color shiner will have a larger dorsal fin. It'll actually kind of look like a fan. And we'll show that on the next slide. And then all of the dorsal rays will be colored dark with a steel color, while the spot fin here just has it on the back few rays. Another characteristic is 8 anal rays for a spot fin, sometimes 9, not very often, but if you get 8, you got a spot fin. These guys are in a lot of different streams. They generally like to breed on submerged watery debris, so they'll generally be in streams where they have a lot of that. You can get them with the seine because they'll do the smaller streams. In any form of electrofishing will also, because they are in a wide range of stream sizes. So here is the steel color. The bottom picture is a female. They don't get the sail type dorsal fin that the male gets on top. So that's a good picture of the exaggeration that occurs for the steel color. They'll also get 9 anal, they also have 9 anal rays. Now with the female, they don't color up like the male. So in order to identify them, it's the anal ray count, or they will also have color through all of their dorsal rays, as versus the spot fin, which won't. It'll just be the last few rays. These guys generally prefer the larger streams. Lots of woody debris for cover and breeding. They don't really like the smaller streams, and they're moderately tolerant. So any form of electrofishing, again, that's generally going to be ubiquitous for all these fish. And maybe you can seine for them in the moderate size streams because they like the pools where you can wade. Scarlet shiners. They kind of have the body shape of like your emerald shiner, your rosy face, or they kind of have that arrow. They have a narrow body. But one of the big things about this species is that they will have this really dark spot on the front bottom of their dorsal fin. And it actually kind of goes out onto the body. So immediately, if you see a dark spot on the dorsal fin and going onto the body, you're probably looking at a scarlet shiner, especially if you're in a smaller stream. These guys will also have a lot of anal fin rays. I think it's around 9, 10, maybe even more. But the big thing is that dark dorsal spot. They like clear water, silt-free. As long as you have those conditions, they're pretty common in the moderate-sized streams. They're moderately intolerant. Again, electrofishing, you can get them with a seine as well. Striped shiners, they like pools. These guys are pretty, there's not much that looks like them in Ohio, except for common shiners. I don't have a picture of a common shiner here, but it's the same body shape. But with striped shiners, they have really large pre-dorsal scales. So scales in front of the dorsal fin, behind the head, on top. They're really large. And also an interesting thing is if you look at them in the sun on the top, they have 3 lines that go from the head back to the tail. And if those lines meet at the tail, then you have a striped shiner. But if they don't meet, then you have a common shiner. And for as large as this shiner is, they only have 8 anal rays. And again, there's not a whole lot that looks like this species. So they like medium-sized streams, gravel, sand, bedrock, boulders, really common species. They will breed in smaller streams and then move into their summer moderate streams for feeding through the year. And these guys hybridize a lot. I've found them hybridized, which was strange, with a spot fin shiner. I've seen them hybridized with rosy face. So they hybridize pretty readily, and generally when you find those type of minnows hybrids, it's generally a nice stream. And again, because of where they generally are located in the stream size, wading electrofishing, and you probably can get them with the seine. White sucker. So these guys, the big thing when you collect a sucker, look at the scale size. If it's really small like this, then you got a white sucker. There's not much else that has these really small scales except for a long nose sucker, which are pretty rare, and they wouldn't be in the Little Miami drainage. And a long nose sucker has, like its namesake, a really long nose. So the big thing with them is small scales, you got a white sucker. Habitat, caught them in everything. They will do the young a year. You can find them in small streams, headwaters. You can get them with a seine, all methods of electrofishing, and they're really tolerant. You find them in really good numbers in degraded systems. And then the northern hogsucker. So these guys will have kind of a modeling with brown, kind of like a mottled sculpin, not necessarily the same color. They'll have like these dark brown saddles, which is kind of muted on this specimen. But big thing with them, they have a broad head that kind of has a dent in it so that they stick to the bottom in really fast flow. So they're high gradient. They like larger substrates. And maybe Ed will talk about his experience with smallmouth bass and northern hogsuckers a little later. but they like to hang around each other. They're really uncommon in small streams. If they're there, they're young a year, just trying to grow up. They like moderate, large streams, really good flow. And because of where they're located in these more shallow areas, you probably can get them with the seine. And then because they're across a lot of different stream sizes, obviously different methods of electrofishing. Again, here, red horse are sucker species. Identifying characteristics with these guys, lateral line scale counts, lip shape, and then color of the caudal fin also. You have species that have this slate colored, and then you have species that'll get red in their tail. With the golden red horse, they have a slate gray tail, and they'll have 39 to 42 lateral line scales. That's an important thing to know because the black red horse looks very, very similar. They also have this slate gray tail. They're also the same golden color, but the lateral line scale count is more on a black, and then the lip shape is a bit different. So with the golden red horse, you have this V shape. The black, you'll see on the next slide, it's more straight across. These guys like moderate gradient, riffles, runs, like gravel, boulders, bedrock. Generally, they don't like a lot of silt. So they're moderately intolerant of pollution. This is pretty much the most common species in Ohio of red horse. Again, these guys will breed in the spring, and then they'll move downstream to larger rivers, like a lot of species, and then they even winter in deep pools and even larger streams. You probably can get these guys with the seine if you're in the right spot, and obviously all methods of electrofishing. So here you have the black red horse, which, as you can see from the top picture, looks really, really similar to the golden, but the body shape is just a little different. It looks more like a cigar, narrow at the back, a little wider at the head, but it generally has a straight body. It's got that straight lip, bottom lip on it, and then it'll have 44 to 47 lateral line scales versus the 39 to 42, 43 for golden. These guys like swifter waters, moderate sized streams. They really like clean substrates. They're intolerant. They don't like a lot of human intervention or pollution. They're pretty uncommon if you're in a place even with a little bit of pollution and silt. They just won't be there. Because they inhabit the same areas as the golden red horse, again, all methods of electrofishing and a seine if you get them in a run. Now, bluegills. So these guys, good panfish. You'll have a black caudal spot in the soft portion of their dorsal fin. They also have a pointed pectoral fin, but one of the things about the pectoral fin is it's long, but it will not go up to the top or over top of their back if you try to make it reach in front of the spiny dorsal. If that happens, then you're looking at a red ear sunfish. These guys are in any size stream, pools, sand, gravel, really common. They're moderately tolerant. If you find a lot of these guys with green sunfish and white suckers, you're looking at a not very nice place. Obviously hook and line, and then electrofishing methods, and probably a seine would be pretty easy too. And then you have here the green sunfish. He's green. He also will have a dark caudal or a dark dorsal spot, just like the bluegill. But these guys have a short, rounded pectoral fin. It's really short. It won't be near as long as the bluegill. Their opercle flap will be flexible. The bluegills won't. Other species. This guy really doesn't look like much anything except for green sunfish, and the green sunfish and bluegill will hybridize, which I'll actually show you on the next slide, because it's possible that you run into it. Again, all stream sizes. The more you get, the less likely it is that that stream is nice. They're really tolerant. Pools, doesn't matter the substrate, silt, muck, gravel, sand, whatever. Again, hook and line, all electrofishing, and a seine. So here is a hybrid. It has a lot of the different attributes of both species. This guy has a short, rounded pectoral fin. It's also got that longer opercle flap, which is probably flexible. It's got that coloration along the jaw of a bluegill, and it's got that smaller kind of rounded caudal fin that you see on a green sunfish. So not in each hybrid will look a little different, but if you know the different attributes of each fish or each species between the bluegill and green sunfish, these guys are pretty easy to pick out. Long ear, these guys can get really, really pretty. Some people would argue with me, but I think these are prettiest sunfish in Ohio. Orange spots get really pretty too, but these guys will have this really large opercle flap that's flexible. The only thing that really looks like them is a northern sunfish, which you wouldn't have down the Little Miami drainage. So if you get something with this really large opercle flap, it's a long ear. Pools, sand, they really like a lot of aquatic vegetation. They're pretty common when they're found, and they're really aggressive in defending nests, the males are. So hook and line is easy. If you catch them during breeding season, you can seine for them. And obviously all electrofishing methods. Rock bass, I don't have a lot to say about a rock bass as far as their identifying them. They look a lot different than the sunfish. They're a little less colorful. They're bronze, slate. They have dark saddles. They have the kind of body shape of a green sunfish, that large mouth, and they're a little longer than they are deep. They really like larger substrates, gravel, cobble boulders, living in the pools of moderate gradient streams. Pretty common when they're found. They're moderately intolerant, and again, hook and line, because they're sunfish, and all electrofishing methods. And you probably can get them with the seine as well. So smallmouth bass, these guys, they have this kind of bronze color. The younger year will have a tricolored tail. It'll be that yellow, black to white on the tips. This is kind of a distinguishing characteristic for this and the spotted bass. There's not really a bass that looks like a smallmouth in Ohio, so not a lot to say about identifying it versus a largemouth versus a spotted. Those two are a little more difficult. These guys like pools and runs, blow riffles. They like a little bit of flow, clean gravel, boulders, bedrock bottoms. They build nests and protect their eggs like a lot of sunfish species. They're pretty common. Obviously hook and line. A lot of people go fishing for them. And then electrofishing. And then you can seine for young of year. They're pretty small and they like to stay in the shallows. And this is a picture of a lunker largemouth bass. You can see that the premaxilla goes beyond the eye, and that is the big characteristic versus the smallmouth and spotted bass. Also, which I will have a picture later on that better shows that the spiny dorsal fin doesn't really connect very well with the soft dorsal. And that's a good characteristic to use if you have, if you're confused as to if you're looking at a spotted bass versus a largemouth. These guys like pools, soft substrates, aquatic vegetation. They like to hide in that stuff. Extremely common. They can tolerate some pretty degraded systems as well. Obviously, the hook and line, all methods of electrofishing. You can even find their young a year in headwaters, so you can seine for them. And here you have a spotted bass. Again, like the smallmouth bass, their young of year has that tricolor tail, the yellow to black to white. You have a broad connection or broader connection between the spiny dorsal and the soft dorsal, which is pretty well shown here. And then the premaxilla does not go past the eye. It generally stays right behind the middle of it. Moderate to large streams, sluggish pools, finer substrates. You can, in nicer systems, are more common than largemouth bass. Obviously, hook and line, electrofishing, and possibly seining for young of year in the shallower areas. So here's a kind of comparison of the two. We collected these at the same site, 2 adults. You can see the broader connection with the spotted bass on top with the spiny dorsal and soft dorsal. And you can see the very shallow connection with the largemouth bass on the bottom. We're getting into catfish here. Yellow bullhead is a tolerant species. You find these in not so nice areas in good numbers. With this species, distinguishing it from the black and brown bullheads, it's pretty easy. If it has white or yellow barbels, it's a yellow. That's really the first thing you look at when you're looking at bullheads. You can also look at the anal fin count. The rays are different. These guys will have the most. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is. Generally don't use that as a characteristic. But these guys, shallow pools, low gradient, they like aquatic vegetation, but as long as there's not a lot of competition, they'll take undercut banks, woody debris, they'll hide in anything. Pretty common. Again, wading and backpack electrofishers for them, a seine as well. The black bullhead. So here you can already see that dark barbels under the chin. Well, it's not a good picture of it, but it has dark barbels. So that's the first thing I'd look at. And then from there, we use serrations on the pectoral spine. If there are not any, then you have a black bullhead. If there are serrations, then you have a brown. What is also a characteristic is you'll have this light patch right at the caudal peduncle, right there where the caudal fin meets the body. There's this light patch that only the black bullhead will have. So dark barbels, no serrations on the spine, and a light patch, you'll have a black bullhead. These inhabit the same places as a yellow bullhead, pools, soft bottoms. They're pretty common as well in degraded systems. They're moderately tolerant and wading, backpack electrofishing, or the seine for collection. Now, brown bullheads, dark barbels, but I think even in this picture, if you look closely, you can see that there are serrations on that pectoral spine, and those are the big things. If you run your thumbnail across that and you got the serrations, or if you can see them, you got a brown bullhead, as long as you got the dark barbels too. The dark on the barbels, it should be brown or black. It doesn't necessarily on a brown have to go all the way up to the chin. It can go part way, halfway or so. But as long as you have dark on the barbels and then these serrations, you're probably looking at a brown. And then make sure that you don't have that light patch at the caudal peduncle. These guys like deeper pools than the other two bullheads. They like more coarse substrates, but they'll do muck as well. They're less common, but again, they're tolerant of pollution as well. Same methods as the other bullheads for collection. And here's a picture of all three at a site we collected. So yellow on top with the light barbels, black in the middle. You can see that light patch at the caudal peduncle, and then you don't have that on the brown at the bottom, but you also have the dark chin barbels. So pretty easy to tell apart once you know what you're looking at. Mad toms, they are smaller species of catfish, generally inhabiting riffles. These guys are actually kind of interesting. Their pectoral spines possess a venom very similar to bees. So if you get stuck by them, it's not fun. Again, with the stone cat versus other mad toms and other catfish, these guys are really long. They get actually really large. They can get almost a foot or so, I think. They get really big for a stone or for a mad tom, and they also have this light saddle right behind their dorsal fin, which is a good characteristic. Especially when you get into the smaller ones where they may have a little more modeling than the other species. Well, they have more modeling than the adults do, and they look more like some of the other species, but they will always have that really light saddle patch. Again, riffles, gravel, cobble, boulder. These are the most common species. We generally find them more often than the other species. They're intolerant of pollution. You can get them at a lot of different size sites. You can seine for them because they like the riffles. They like the shallow areas if you're inclined to look for them. So black striped top minnows. These guys are pretty small, only a couple inches. They have that really dark lateral line. And they like the top of the water. They're always on the top. If they only go down when they get scared. So, and there's really not a lot that looks like them. They kind of look like a stud fish or something like that. But this is really the only thing that it's the only fish that looks like this in Ohio. They like low gradients. They like aquatic vegetation. So they don't like flow. They like almost like wetland streams, backwaters, stuff like that. So, and wading gear is the best for them. It's actually interesting. It's really hard to collect them with boat electrofisher. Something about their nervous system makes them really hard to shock. So actually seining for them is the best collection method. And then I think this is the last fish for today. So the gizzard shad, or bait fish, really. These guys are detritivores. They eat organic matter. They like really slow-moving water, large rivers. They're pretty commonly stocked in like reservoirs for feeder fish, for walleye, saugeye. So they're common in big streams and backwaters of large rivers. And boat electrofishing is the easiest way to catch them. It's pretty hard to catch them with any of the other gear because they're not in smaller streams, and seining because they like pools. These guys have kind of a unique body shape. They're deep bodied. They can get pretty large. They can get over a foot if you get a really big one. And they have a really dark spot right behind their opercle. And they have really small scales too. And that anal fin has a lot of anal rays. But this is a pretty unique shaped fish in Ohio. And then I'll toss it over to Ed.
Okay, anyway, everyone hear me? Let's see. Okay, I'm going to talk a little about Power BI, which is a piece of software we started using maybe a year ago. And what it allows you to do is map some of the data very easily. So what I'm going to show you is something I drafted up fairly quickly, but it'll let us see the let us see distributions of little Miami fish species. And basically, what this software, I brought data in from Excel. You can bring it in from other databases. And I basically linked two files together from our database. One is a list of all the fish species that we've collected, or Ohio EPA's collected, or others that we have collected in Little Miami drainage. And it linked to a list of the species. And basically what it lets you do is create a map, and you can pick a species. Here is, I had selected streamline chub, which is one of the rare ones that Matt will talk about tomorrow, but it lets you pull up this is a picture I just got off the web, but this tool will let you, as long as you have a URL or a link in the species file, you can pull in pictures. And then this is a map of Southwest Ohio. So, and then if you click on a point, it'll tell you information. So, for example, this data is from the East Fork, Little Miami, basically from 2012. It has a description of the location downstream of the Claremont County Wastewater Treatment Plant. It tells you something about the species, their breeding guild, their an intolerant species. And it shows you the distribution. The bigger the point, the more relative, the more fish were collected at that site. So this is a fairly uncommon species. It's a very sensitive one, but we can go pick one like that's more common. This is in alphabetical order right here. But we can pick one like the banded darter, which is a little more widely distributed, so you can see, and you can actually use these buttons to zoom in. So if you're going to be out collecting, you could use this little piece of software. If you're going to be out collecting on a certain stream, you can zoom in and get an idea of what species you're likely to find. So the banded darter is one that's widely distributed. Big-eyed chub is pretty uncommon, other uncommon species. I'll pick black red horse, again, fairly widely distributed. There are some, like I think one of the last ones Matt talked about was the black striped top minnow. And you can see that's really concentrated in the northern part of the watershed for the most part. Blue sucker is only found down by the mouth. Let's see, we can pick one like, again, brook stickleback. Another one associated with some of the aquatic vegetation and some of the cooler streams up in the northern part of the watershed. Mud minnow, another one up in that northern part. So the useful part about this is when you're going out to do fish sampling, it is very helpful to know what's been collected in that stream or that area before you go. And that's one of the things that I always did before I went out and did a survey, is I would look at trout in one of the fish books, and you get similar data from that, or you can use something like this to see what is there. Fathead minnow distributed pretty widely through the watershed as well. One of the interesting things you can do. This has the data that we have. I was able to use range from actually data from the late '60s to the current range. But if you pick something that was very tolerant, like let me go back up to the carp by goldfish. That's a hybrid that was always one of our signatures of very polluted water, because we only found it where we're seeing a lot of wastewater treatment plant type impacts, and a lot of those things were dealt with pretty well by the year 2000. So you can see the distribution there, and there's a way you can change the year range. So if I go to say 2000, whoops. And this is what they call a data slicer, and it constrains it to a much narrower range. So you can see in the last 20 years, there's only basically one location where that was found, and it was only one individual. So that's one that showed a very was more widely distributed when things weren't polluted. As things have cleaned up, that one fortunately has actually declined. Another one is that shows a different pattern, would be like the northern studfish is one that may have been introduced, and there are a fair number of collections up in the upper part of the watershed. But if you look at data from, say, the earlier part of the data range, dated up to 2000, whoops. It really was probably just found just around that later time period. So you can use this to look at patterns of change over time of species as well. So this is there are different versions of this software. There's a free version you can download, and there's also a pro version, which we're working out some of the kinks with, because you need Windows 365 for us to be able to publish some of the of these maps on the web. But we can send you these files. If you have that free software that you download, you can pull this up on your computer and use it. We could send you this file. You could open up and see what we're seeing here. So it's sort of a handy piece of software. You can add to this. There are different types of visualizations you could download and take the data and do other things with it. There's actually a way to animate the map by date. So you can actually pick a species, and it will go through and show you how the distribution changes over years, for example. So there's a lot of potential with a tool like this to see distributions of fish. That would be useful for someone going out in the field and before they're going out and doing that kind of work, or looking at their data after it's collected. Well, Chris or Matt would like to add anything?
No, I think you covered it.
The only thing I would add is this has location data in it, right, Ed?
Yes.
Yeah, so you could manipulate it just to produce the list of species for a particular stream if you knew how to manipulate the data within the Power BI platform. And how easy would that be for a novice user to accomplish?
Well, you can go over, if they have this file, you can, this over here, there's this is the graphics part, but there's also a data part. And then you can potentially extract that data as an Excel spreadsheet and sort it yourself at that point. So that data is the underlying data is attached there.
Okay. So what we did was just kind of develop a teaser for this. You could do a lot more with it, but
Right.
We were told you were interested in certain streams and what fish you might encounter when you go out. I forgot to mention at the beginning, there is a part of our task is provide field training. And we are hoping to accomplish that by the end of June. But with the current restrictions, we need to be careful how we do that. We'll hopefully have some experience of our own with our own training classes by that time, so we'll be more comfortable doing something like that with you. But we do have a field day incorporated into the project.
One thing Matt mentioned was smallmouth bass and hogsuckers. I actually did my master's thesis on smallmouth bass habitat selection on a stream in Michigan, and I got to spend 2 summers sitting on the banks of a creek with a pair of binoculars with polarizing filters attached to them. It was a very clear, shallow stream. So I got to not only see what habitats bass were using, but I was able to watch a lot of the behaviors. And one of the neat things, if you look at the historic sort of fishery literature, the people thought in the 30s and the 40s that suckers would eat bass eggs. And so there were a lot of attempts to try to actually poison suckers out of bass streams, thinking that would juice the population. But it didn't really work. And in reality, it's the opposite. There's actually a positive relationship between suckers and bass. So when bass are small, about 2 or 3 inches long, they will follow hogsuckers as the hogsuckers feed on the bottom. They have that big muscular snout. They'll lay on the bottom. They'll actually flip rocks over. And I was actually able to count the number of bites bass take when they feed by themselves or when they feed following hogsuckers. And it's like 4 or 5 times as much, feeding attempts as when they're feeding by themselves. And in fact, I would notice that the little bass would follow their hogsucker and defend it from other little bass. So another bass would try to steal their hogsucker, and they would flare their gill covers out and basically have a standoff over it. So there's actually a very positive relationship between the suckers, particularly the hogsuckers, and smallmouth bass. They actually are, I don't know if the hogsuckers gain anything from that relationship, but the bass definitely benefit from that. So that was sort of a fun thing to see. And that's another way to look at fish. Is there's actually that a guy in New York did a fish viewing. He wrote a fish viewing book. He actually used a underwater periscope and looked at fish behavior. You can sit on the banks. Another thing I've done is I have an underwater camera, which is an Olympus TG5. It's not real expensive, but what I've been able to do is run a piece of Wi-Fi antenna from the tape it with duct tape to the camera, run up a pole to my iPhone, and you can actually see what the camera sees underwater. So that's another way to actually watch fish, and it is pretty interesting to do that. I'm probably going to write up a little fact sheet for the MBI website here in the next month or so. I was hoping to go out and get some more good pictures, but the kind of rainfall we had is pretty debilitating. I mean, you need really clear water to get really good underwater pictures. Otherwise, you see sort of shadows.
Right, very good, gentlemen. Anything else for the good of the order here this evening before we break and look forward to your presentation tomorrow?
I mean, just if there were questions about some of the stuff we went over tonight.
Are we still, or have we been unmuted, Eric?
Yes, we're all unmuted as much as I can do here on this end. Yes.
Well, I unmuted myself and I didn't know whether it worked or not. I would like to ask a question. I mean, this was a very interesting presentation. I can see, however, that if I go out there and try to do some fish identification, I'm asking this question because we're very interested in having a program with Little Miami Conservancy in which we try to organize fish identification on tributaries and on Little Miami River, just to see what we can get with lay people using iNaturalist, which is a layperson's way of getting help with identification from that system. Now, my question is this. If I catch something and I want to get identification, I'm going to take pictures of it. But I can see that maybe my picture wouldn't show the undersides and the aspects that you talked about here. Can you make a suggestion generally, if you have a specimen and you want to photograph it, how you should do that? I mean, should you take it from the top, the side, the bottom, you know, whatever? Any thoughts on that for amateurs?
So definitely the side. And then it depends. So for suckers, I would say the mouth would be a good one. So if you have the side and the mouth, you can generally identify it from that. And then for minnows, the side. I mean, with all fish, you take a picture of the side, and then with minnows, each kind of type has their own thing that you zero in on, and most of it you can see from the side. But with something like the rosy face, emerald shiner, silver shiner complex, then you'd want to get a picture of the head from the top so that you can see if you have those black crescents. I didn't have a picture to show, but they're pretty, when they're there, they're very noticeable. And with stuff like the striped shiner, common shiner, getting a picture from the top as well. But I don't think I'd take the picture of anything from the bottom unless it's a sucker and you're getting like a picture of the mouth. So the side and the top if you want to be safe.
I'd probably add to that if you can, when you take a picture, if you get the fins to be deployed, that helps too. But I would say 99% of the time, we could probably ID most of the fish by just seeing a side profile.
Mm-hmm.
Even because we've kind of developed what's called a gestalt. We know it when we see it, kind of thing. The best analogy is that I could describe one of my parents to you and let you pick them out of a crowd, try to, but I could pick them out immediately. That's the analogy. So
some fish biologists have take out in the field like a small flat, and they got a plexiglass, like what they call like a fish photographing. And if you have like a piece of plexiglass that's loose in there, occasionally you can put the fish in that one. You have clear water. You can push that piece of plexiglass sort of against, press the fish a bit to the front, and occasionally that will force them to put their fins up. That's one way if you wanted and there might even be an article I saw on the web about how to build like a little photography tank like that.
Yeah, a lot of the really good pictures I got from Brian Zimmerman and Zach Alley, they were from photo tanks, like they built themselves.
And those
And I
aren't
don't
too
think they're very
difficult
difficult
to
to
make.
do.
Yeah. The other thing I would add is you could text us a picture.
Yeah.
On the spot, and we could probably get back to you fairly quickly.
I think that was the answer I was looking for.
Yeah. But I mean, we'd be willing to do that. That's not a problem. We do it for people all the time.
Yeah. The book that you referred to, Ohio Fish Identification for Naturalists, was it? Or
Oh, nah, here I can.
I have the Rice book called Native Fishes of Ohio.
That's a different book.
Yeah, I realize that now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So he has 2 books out, and that one is a much simpler presentation.
So do you find that the other book is much more valuable in fish identification? I mean, I thought we had something pretty darn good going here when we again thinking about our wish to have a program. I thought that this Native Fishes of Ohio would be a good verification tool. You want to comment on that? Is the other one better, or are they both pretty good? Or
so they're both good. If you're just somebody going out and kicking around in a stream, and you're working with live specimens, a naturalist guide. So Dan Rice, Brian Zimmerman book. Is that what you guys can see with my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the book that has really great pictures, and some of them are like ideal pictures, like the steel color shiner that I had from Zimmerman. That male is a breeding male in color. He caught it at the perfect time. That's not going to be all the time. So with that, like you refer to Trotman, and Trotman has maybe better descriptions of when they're not in color or something like that, because his are drawings. But if you're just going out there and trying to compare a live specimen to a picture, then this is the book.
Matt, they may not know what you mean by referring to Troutman.
Sorry, the Fishes of Ohio, the
1981.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm not even sure how you get that anymore, but
Amazon. I got mine on Amazon.
Amazon has it. Okay.
I mean, I don't know about right now. That's where I get a lot of my stuff. That's where I got Fishes of Wisconsin and.
Yeah, it's a black and white book with hand drawings of fish. They're very detailed.
Yeah, and that's what I prefer in the lab, because if I bring back a preserved specimen, I'm not working with color. But also, I'm colorblind, so I'm generally not working with color anyway. So the pictures, they're nice. They don't work for me, but somebody else who doesn't have my deficiencies would much rather have the actual photographs, especially how great they are in Zimmerman's book. Those pictures are really good.
I had a couple basic questions just from what you guys said. Hopefully they're pretty quick. I was just curious, you talked a lot about small versus medium versus large streams.
Right.
Curious what the definitions there would be and kind of what we'd see on most of Little Miami.
So the main stem of Little Miami is probably it's a larger river. So moderate. These are definitions that I was going off of from Trotman. So his definitions may be a little different than mine, but if I can weight it with my gear, I generally, if I'm using weighting gear like a tote barge or something like that, I generally call that moderate stream. Smaller streams, like I can I don't have any problems with the pools. They're not deep, not wide, and I can hit it with like a backpack electrofisher. And large rivers, I mean, like Little Miami, Great Miami, Scioto River, Muskingum.
Yeah, it's helpful. And then the other question, maybe I missed it when you guys were going through the tool. The data set that you guys are using for that tool, what's all in that data set and who all collected that data?
That's data collected by MBI, Ohio EPA, Ohio DNR. There's some Ohio DNR data in there. There may be some consultant and university data as well. But majority of it's probably Ohio EPA and MBI data. I'd say probably 90% of that. It doesn't have like some of the historic data from Fishes of Ohio or something like that in it. So most of the data is probably post, like starting in 79 and going forward from there.
Thanks.
When you hear somebody refer to a ventral fin, are they talking about the pectoral fin or the pelvic fin?
So probably pelvic. The fins, probably pelvic or anal. I mean, there'd be fins on the belly.
Someone use that term?
Yeah, I've heard that term ventral fin used. No,
Oh, you've heard it used. Yeah. Well, ventral usually means on the bottom. So probably pelvic fin would be what that might synonymize with.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
One thing I didn't mention is we don't really have it's not something we have distributed, but I wrote a little app that would, or program that would allow you, if you take your most sensitive species you catch at a site, and you say you get a rainbow darter and banded darter, you take those two species, enter them into this little app, it will go through the Ohio data for similar sized streams and say if you get those two species, what's your probability that your fish IBI scores that we use to sort of rate condition are, say, excellent, good, fair, and so on. So it'll give you some idea from those most sensitive species whether you're in an exceptional, so if you're getting, for example, if you're getting streamlined chub, which is again a rare thing, but it's almost always associated with exceptional biological conditions. If the most sensitive thing you're getting is a carp, you're going to be distributed on the other side of our indices. So it's a way of, based on what you get, to at least give you some range of condition there. Now there's one problem is it depends on how good a sampler you are. If the better fish are there and you're not collecting them, you're going to it's going to give you a lower sort of rating. But if you're able to go in and get the sensitive species that are there, it'll probably give you a pretty good approximation of where it fits along a gradient of condition as it's measured in Ohio.
Ed, is that something we can look at tomorrow night's session a bit?
I
hear a little bit more about that.
I could probably show you. Yeah, I could probably make a slide or two. I don't have something I can distribute. I mean, one idea I have is to see if I could deliver that to like a Power BI interface, and I don't have that yet. But I could show an example or two of output from that.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, we've talked about doing that for years, and so to get it fully developed would take some time to analyze. But I think you can get a flavor for what you can do with it. By the way, I did verify ventral fin is the pelvic fin. It's straight off of Google, so it has to be true.
Thanks.
All righty, any other questions? All righty,
We
guys.
can hang on. It's no problem.
Sure,
But if
sure.
you want to wrap it up, that's fine too.
Yeah, let's, I'll leave the channel open here and stop the recording. And if there's anyone else that has some last minute questions, we'll try to work it in yet tonight. I'll remind you that tomorrow evening at 6:30, we'll be back here, same place, same channel, same meeting ID number, to look at a host of new information on the main stem and some other interesting issues. So I encourage you all to join us again. And to the guys from MBI, thanks so much. It was a great program.